We have a community leader, Mike Fandacaro. Mike Fandacaro is very well known for his outreach to and knowledge of Latino and other minority communities in the Northeast. He is a founder of the Upstate Latino Summit and has for years been involved in the Festival of Nations. Mike is a graduate of College of St. Rose with degrees in Spanish and Public Communication. Community leader Mike Fandacaro is going to show us the various levels of government in New York State. Welcome, Mike Fandacaro.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Now, just because I know this is being recorded, I have a big mouth and a rather big voice. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, I don't need this then.
But we need to record.
Oh, you do need to record it. Okay, so I have to tone down my voice and not get so big. Just first thing I always do whenever I speak, my grown-up job is with the New York State Department of Transportation. What I say today does not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the New York State Department of Transportation or the state of New York. Capiche? That's my Italian. Some people drove from quite a way, and then there's one individual here who knows where Canton, New York is? It's way up. And there we had a few students at the last Civic Leadership Forum, so também eu falo português, I also speak Portuguese. Giovanni Gutierrez Ornai, muito obrigado pela sua presença hoje. Thank you very much for your presence here today. She came from St. Lawrence University to be with us. Giovanni is from Timor-Leste, which is one of only two predominantly Catholic countries in Asia, the other, of course, being the Philippines. Giovanni, thank you so much. And we have representation from 10, oh, by the way, I thought it was so important to get Giovanni yesterday that I blew off the reception for the opening of the SOMOS conference, the annual Hispanic conference, at the governor's mansion. So that's how important it was to get her. We have 10 Asian countries repped here today. Our mission when we leave here is to get more and more and more. And let's expand beyond that. Let's expand to other communities of color. HP Nazar and I next week, going to speak Spanish now. La semana que viene vamos a ir a Poughkeepsie para Hudson Valley Latino Forum. HP Nazar and I next week, we're going to the Hudson Valley Latino Forum in Poughkeepsie. We're going to see how they do things. I'm presenting there as well. The more we unite, the more voices we have at the table, minority, immigrant, refugee communities, the stronger we are. That is the most important thing that we can take. And finally, HP mentioned an average amount of money being spent in congressional district races. There is an election taking place. Pennsylvania 18th District reaches the suburbs and rural areas around Pittsburgh. Guess how much money is going to be spent on TV advertising alone by the time that race ends on Tuesday? Anybody want to guess? 12. 12 billion. So thanks everyone for being here. Next slide, please. Today's a special anniversary in a very strange kind of way. New York state government and politics is normally topsy-turvy. This day 10 years ago, state government and politics was not topsy-turvy. It was placed in the blender, and people put it on damn puree. Imam, do you remember what happened that day 10 years ago? When everything stopped? Somebody mentioned it. Today is the 10th anniversary of the Eliot Spitzer scandal. I came out of a meeting, and I see an email that says former Governor Spitzer, and the subject was, who do we have to pay for companionship? So I'm looking on the Times Union, New York Times website. I can't get on for about 5-10 minutes because the traffic has bogged both those websites down. All of a sudden I see what happens. I show it to my supervisor. She says, what does this mean? And I said, the person I read for is about to become governor of New York State. For many years, I was the reader for then Senate Democratic leader David Paterson, who's legally blind. He became lieutenant governor. I still read for him. So I gave him a call, said, lieutenant governor, or maybe governor designate, anything you need, I'll be there. So over that period of the next week before he became governor, I started reading him summaries of the governors general of New Netherlands. the colonial governors of the colony of New York, then each and every governor, something about each and every governor of New York State that preceded him. Elliot Spitzer got a 1600 on his SAT, by the way, just in case you wanted to know. The day of his inauguration, the secretary to the governor, who is the de facto chief of staff, asked me to become his full-time reader. I stayed at DOT, maintained my part-time reader position, but in November 2010, he had me and about 10 of my friends over Governor Patterson for a private dinner at the Executive Mansion, which was pretty cool. And he took us up in the elevator. It's a 70-year-old elevator there. It's a rather old elevator. He said, no need to worry about a thing to all of us. This is a 70-year-old elevator operated by a blind guy. David had a unique wit. And this was not the first time I was on the periphery of a scandal involving governors. See me during the networking after this. Ask me about the infamous Mario Cuomo scandals tape from the 1990s. I was a part of that. So next slide, please. The three branches of government. While nothing ever, as you get down, fits necessarily into executive, legislative, and judicial, this will give you basically a context for what you're going to see. Next slide, please. Welcome to the village of Menands. It's a village within the town of Colony in Albany County. Next slide, please. If you live in Menands, this is everyone you vote for in a 4-year period. It's about 40 or 45 separate elected positions, from president, vice president, all the way down to school board members. Next slide, please. In other towns or villages, you may vote for these offices. Not all of them are held on election day. Fire district elections take place whenever. Massachusetts town elections take place now. Individual towns have elections on various days between March and June. Already in the state of Massachusetts, we've had about 11 or 12 Asian Americans elected to various offices in 3 Massachusetts towns. I'd recommend, and if anybody's interested, you can email me. I will send you the link to an excellent report on special elected districts that the Office of Comptroller Tom DiNapoli did a few years ago. Next slide, please. The executive, legislative, and judicial structure for the state of New York. The Attorney General, which is a cabinet-level position federally, is a separate elected position technically within the executive branch. That's the state's chief legal officer. People think that's the state's law enforcement officer. It's not. That more or less goes to the district attorneys elected in every county for the most part. And the state comptroller, Mr. DiNapoli, he manages the pension fund and audit state operations. State workers, you know about the pension fund, right? Yeah, we like that. Next slide. There are 62 counties in New York State. But 5, Bronx, Kings, New York, Queens, and Richmond, are New York City. Counties either have an elected county executive or a county manager appointed by a county board of supervisors or the county legislature, which is the legislative branch. The New York City counties have their own borough president, district attorney, and courts, but they all vote for mayor of New York and a couple of other elected positions, public advocate, city controller, and they're all represented in the legislative branch by the New York City Council. So you see how things just vary all over the place. Gets even more varied. Next slide. Also 62 cities in New York State. To my knowledge, only Geneva, not Switzerland, but Geneva and the Finger Lakes, does not have a mayor. The city council in Geneva appoints an administrator. The second Ron Kim who's going to speak, he may be able to spend a little time telling you about Saratoga Springs' very unique system of government. And it is a very unique system of government. Next slide. 932 towns in the state of New York. And this is where you begin to see the molding, in a way, the merging of the executive and legislative functions. Because yes, while we have our 2 fabulous and wonderfully distinguished town supervisors here today, I thank you, I can't thank you enough for your presence. Let's say the town board has an even number of members. Let's say there's a tie on the town board, well then the town supervisor, that vote becomes even more important because that vote cast, that's the deciding vote that's cast. Sometimes that happens in town governmental operations. Next slide. 556 villages in New York State. The mayor also has a vote on the village board. The difference, there is a city mayor, there are village mayors. Basically, they have the same executive functions, but the mayor of a city is not on the legislative branch, whereas in village, it is. Next slide. This is a picture I always use. This is Monroe in Orange County. The town of Monroe office next to the village of Monroe office. I see Phil shaking his head right now.
Waste of money.
Some villages have actually voted themselves out of existence. As I was telling Yasmin earlier, there was at one time Ticonderoga, which is a town in Essex County in the North Country. There was a town, but there was a village within the town of Ticonderoga. That village on election day, 1993, voted itself out of existence, and the village merged into the town on January 1st, 1994. Final slide. School districts. We have 733 school districts in the state of New York. Now, most of the districts have public votes for school boards. They take place on the third Tuesday in May, and of course, we have 4 Asian Americans serving on school boards in the capital region: Niskayuna, Albany, Guilderland, Bethlehem, which is wonderful. Some major school districts, major city school districts like the city of Albany, when I vote for school board members, that takes place on election day in November. And then a few districts like Yonkers have their members appointed by the mayor. So there are even some variances there. And there's no vote for a school board president. That president is elected in a vote of the school board members. So that, very briefly, is a look at the various levels of government in New York State. And when you saw that Village of the Man slide and how many elected offices you can vote for, I can tell you, village elections are coming up. If you live in a village in New York State, a lot of you will be voting in village elections later this month. Get out to vote. Get out in May for your school board election if you have one. June for congressional primaries, September for other primaries, November general election. We have no voice if we don't vote. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions you might have. None? Good. We'll try to get closer to oh wait, I see one. Yes.
This is extremely informative information, but my question is, how can you get this presentation if you want? Are you going
I
to share
will send it to,
I have
Howard
it.
has it, and he can email it to the membership.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your research. Very, very useful information.
Thank you so much. Any additional questions?
Thank you, Community Leader Mike Fandacaro. It's a great pleasure to have you here. And due to the time constraint,